Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, June 21st, 1989. We're a couple days late, folks, I know. It happens. June 21st, 1989, the U.S. Supreme Court decided 5-4 that under the First Amendment of the United States, the burning of the American flag was a legal exercise of political speech. This was, of course, a big moment when it comes to free speech, but also a big moment in the very long and very fraught history regarding the American flag. For most of the 20th century, there were legal battles and laws and public debates about, quote-unquote, disrespecting the American flag by using it in commercial settings or hanging it the wrong way, or in this case, burning it. So let's talk about this ruling, Texas v. Johnson. Here, as always, are Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
And our special guest for this episode, I mentioned that ruling went 5-4. Well, from the brilliant 5-4 podcast, which calls itself a podcast about how the Supreme Court sucks. Here is our special guest, Michael Liroff, lawyer and co-host of that podcast. Michael, thank you so much for doing this. And I'm a big fan of 5-4, so thanks.
Mm-hmm. Same.
Thank you. It's just, I feel very lucky to get a chance to come and talk about a time when the Supreme Court didn't suck. That's nice. I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
Did the Supreme Court suck in this moment? But before we get there, does anyone want to take a guess? I mentioned this is Texas v. Johnson. Does anyone want to guess which of those parties was the one that burned the flag and which of those parties was the one that was upset about the burning of the flag?
You know what? It's like 107 in San Antonio today, so it could have been Texas. It could have just spontaneously combusted.
It's true.
So, yes, folks, it is Johnson who burns the flag, Gregory Lee Johnson. Niki, why does he burn a flag?
He does it as a sign of protest. It's 1984 at the Republican National Convention, where Reagan is being renominated, and it's kind of a protest against Reagan's use of patriotism, this sense of waving the flag in order to cover the many sins of American foreign policy and American domestic politics. And so it is a protest against his renomination.
He says he wanted to do as much as possible to, quote, puncture the whole chauvinistic, Ramboistic atmosphere around that convention. And he cites U.S. involvement in Nicaragua and Grenada. And so, a reminder, there was a little moment where that was something to protest. And it's still, it not just be baffled about, but actually protest that our little excursion in Grenada.
It's also a reminder that if he had done this in Alaska or Wyoming, it might not have mattered because those are the only two states that basically didn't have these laws that had prohibitions on desecrating the flag or flag burning.
Yeah.
And there might not have been anyone around to see it.
Well, that's true. But Michael, I don't know if you have thoughts on this specific case or specific incident, but also just in the larger cultural context, I think it's hard to overstate how much this question of should you be allowed to burn an American flag was just like, it felt like, I wasn't fully engaged in the debate at that time, but I was toddling around. But my sense is like it was just this real front of mind question.
Yeah, I think this case is one of the, if not the high watermarks for free speech and political expression generally in this country. The First Amendment, we have a very sort of broad idea of what it is now. And part of the reason for that is this case. When the country was founded, it was very different. Back when the country wasn't even a decade old, when John Adams was president, they passed a law called the Sedition Acts and jailed people for criticizing the government. One regular citizen got jailed for drunkenly jeering at the president. There was serious repercussions for subordinate or dissident political speech in the early days. Now, that was controversial. Thomas Jefferson was a big critic of the Sedition Acts. But, even in the 60s, there was a seminal case, U.S. v. O'Brien, very similar, where a protest, a sort of left-wing protest against the Vietnam War, involved not strictly speaking speech, but what the courts call expressive conduct, where O'Brien burned not a flag, but a draft card. And He was arrested, and the Supreme Court upheld his conviction for burning a draft card. And so only 20 years later, you have something very similar you have this expressive conduct, this sort of subordinate, dissident conduct. It very easily could have gone the other way. And I think it sort of helped cement this very libertarian, I think, ideal that we should be able to say and do what we want, that the government shouldn't be punishing people for criticizing it. I think it's a really, really important case for free speech jurisprudence, but also for our culture, generally speaking.
Yeah, I think about, it's not exactly the same thing, but in the abolitionist movement, William Lloyd Garrison takes a copy of the U.S. Constitution and sets it on fire. And it would have been, considered analogous to a flag in a lot of ways.
Oh, for sure.
It's a powerful statement to be able to not just tear something up, but to burn it up.
Yeah.
Really expresses the sense of passion and protest that people had for their grievances.
Yeah. I just want to add some context about kind of the laws around the flag itself. Some of the earliest litigation was about kind of the commercial use of the flag. There was a law in 1907 about two businessmen who were selling beer and they wanted to put a flag on the bottle, and that became a whole thing. But then it's clearly becomes politicized, as you mentioned, into the 60s, and that's when Congress passes this federal flag desecration law after a Vietnam War protest. And the language there is, it's illegal to knowingly cast contempt upon any flag of the United States by publicly mutilating, defacing, defiling, burning, or trampling upon it. So I'm just curious, Michael, if you have thoughts on why the flag itself is such a touchstone, and what you make of the sort of idea that, if you're going to say that you can't desecrate a flag during a protest, that also means that you shouldn't be allowed to put a flag on a beer bottle. I mean, how are all these things connected?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a powerful symbol. And symbols are important. They matter in our politics, right? So it's not surprising that the people get very impassioned by this, by seeing this stuff. Sort of an interesting vote breakdown in this case to this point. Mm-hmm. This was a conservative majority court, but one of the conservatives a couple conservatives had to cross over, and Antonin Scalia, who's sort of infamously very conservative, had the deciding vote because one of the liberals, John Paul Stevens, voted to uphold the flag burning laws because he was a Navy man. He had been a code breaker in the war, and it meant a lot to him. The flag means a lot to people, and they get very upset when they see it burned. But that's what makes it a powerful political statement, To me, the First Amendment is all about political expression, that we can't really have free and fair elections in a democracy if we can't speak our mind about our politics. So this is the core of the First Amendment to me. Not everybody sees it that way, though. But yeah, so it cheapens it to put it on a beer bottle, right? It cheapens it to turn it black and white and only put, one blue stripe across it. It cheapens the symbolism a little bit. And so I get why it's connected, and I get why people who are politically engaged want to keep it with a sort of special place in our law,
Michael, I love that we gave you a Supreme Court case that not only sucks, but in which Antonin Scalia doesn't suck.
Yes, I know.
That's wild to me.
Yeah, well, I got to talk about him doing one of the rare good things in his tenure. And
so, have you heard how he reflected upon this case? I mean, in 2015, just before he died, he was asked about this, and he said, "If it were up to me, I would put in jail every sandal-wearing, scruffy-bearded weirdo who burns the American flag. But I'm not a king, so I had to, do what I could."
Regretfully.
Right.
I will say,
Wow.
I currently, recording this podcast, qualify for two of those three descriptors. Mm-hmm. I have a scruffy-bearded weirdo wearing sandals right now. I'm not burning an American flag, but I don't think Scalia
Podcast
would be a
isn't
fan
over
of
yet.
me. Yeah.
But I do think that the idea of the American flag, particularly in the 20th century, when it's becoming more protected, when you get a new wave of espionage and sedition acts around World War I and World War II, and then the Cold War, that symbolism and the kind of oppressive conformity around the flag is such an important part of American identity and foreign policy. And so it is, I think, perhaps unsurprising that in these moments you're getting more protections around the flag. In the 60s, as things get a little more tumultuous, and the flag becomes more of an object of debate, that you get even harsher laws wrapped around it because, now somebody might actually burn the flag. You get Honor America Day. You get these huge patriotic celebrations in the 60s and 70s, especially with the bicentennial, in order to sort of make sure that the flag is front and center. And then you get something like a 1984 The Morning in America ad for Reagan that is all about the flag. And it's interesting to me that this court case is decided as the Cold War is coming to an end. And that sort of like oppressive atmosphere is going to be eased, at least for about, let's say, 12 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's even another plot twist, which I discovered sort of researching for my next book, was that in the Black community during the 40s and 50s, the flag was a huge symbol of American identity because the Confederate flag was everywhere in the South. And so by African Americans hoisting up an American flag was their way of saying, like, we are American, take down this Confederate flag. And there's this famous image of a Black child having an American flag stripped away from him while his mother is trying to vote because he was trying to reaffirm American identity amongst a sea of Confederate flags.
Wow.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting The World Together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
It feels like Justice Brennan, who writes the majority opinion here, is kind of trying to speak to this larger question as well, because he writes, we're tempted to say, in fact, that the flag's deservedly cherished place in our community will be strengthened, not weakened, by our holding today that it's legal to burn it. Our decision is a reaffirmation of the principles of freedom and inclusiveness that the flag best reflects, and of the conviction that our tolerance of criticism, such as Johnson's, is a sign and source of our strength. So, Mike, I'm sure that's music to your ears, that kind of language, but I'm just curious from a legal or rhetorical perspective, I mean, how much does that frame the First Amendment in a way that maybe has an impact on future cases or this larger conversation that we're painting a picture of?
Yeah, no, I think it's important framing. And, I think also Scalia's comments, too, are interesting, and sort of taking these comments together are interesting because he was also ruling from a position of strength as a Republican where, this case came down after George H.W. Bush was elected, and we're looking at now 12 years going of consecutive Republican rule. The 80s were just sort of dominated by conservative sort of libertarian ideology. So in terms of this is a sign of our source, a sign and source of our strength. I think it is also a sign and source of, conservative strength that, like, hey, we won. So what? So the scruffy weirdos want to burn a flag. Let them burn a flag. That's all they can do. They don't have any other power. They are locked out of power. Conservatives were ascendant here, and it was this very, business friendly, low government is the problem conservatism that, really wanted a lot of just sort of laissez-faire culture. And so I think this reflects that. But I don't like a lot of that stuff, but I do think it had a lot of salutary effects on free speech jurisprudence and free speech culture. Like, I think a whole generation was raised, in the sort of after effects of that, with the belief that, like, yeah, I'm allowed to criticize whoever I want. I'm allowed to say what I want. You can't throw me in jail because I, burned a flag or I criticized the president. That's freedom. That's a good conception of freedom. And it's one we should celebrate.
It's funny to me, too, like, the penalties, too. Like, a year in jail.
Yeah.
Like, that's $2,000 was it $2,000?
Yeah, that's what Texas was going after him for.
That's not chump change.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, that's a pretty severe punishment, I think, for burning a flag. And was it later that Trump said someone should, like, lose their citizenship or something like that? I was like, what?
Just like taking that away.
Yeah, I know. Let's just take away your citizenship and a year in jail. Like, it's absurd, the kind of penalties that we associate with burning the flag.
But interesting that it doesn't gain a lot of traction. I mean, after 9/11, there's a lot of flag stuff going on.
Yeah.
And Hillary Clinton, when she's in the Senate, co-sponsors the flag protection as a way of bringing back some of this prohibition on harming or desecrating the flag. And it doesn't really go anywhere. Donald Trump's statement doesn't really go anywhere. And while there is this still kind of oppressive flag culture around, like, flag pins in the 2000s, especially for people running for office, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of public support or real energy behind burning the flag again.
Well, though the polling is surprisingly consistent, and I mean, certainly in the wake of this, 75% of Americans said it should be illegal to burn the flag. And then I looked at the polling over the years, and it basically hovers between the upper 50s and the upper 60s. But I mean, it's pretty consistent. Majority of Americans think it should be illegal. Now, obviously all sorts of questions
Very little
about when
salience, right?
Yeah, exactly. When you're asking someone to poll, it's different from seeing it actually play out and deciding what's going to happen in real time.
I mean, I think, listen, is it pleasant to watch anything burning like that? I mean, probably not. You're not going to get a whole lot of people that are going to, cheer you on. But I think most people would understand, like, what it means to be able to protest and have a First Amendment right and what that looks like. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are, excited about it. But are you able to say, yeah, sure, fine, that's your right? I think people can have consensus about that.
Another tidbit that catches my eye is that, you can still get arrested for burning a flag because you are technically lighting a fire without a permit. So I think people have gotten in trouble for that.
Of course.
Including this, including this Gregory Lee Johnson character who in 2016 at the RNC, again in Cleveland, was arrested again for burning the American flag. They got him on some lighting without a permit or not having a permit to be arrested. But, I was reading about this. Well, I should say, they eventually dropped charges. He sued the city of Cleveland. Cleveland paid him $225,000 in settlements. So there you go. But I was reading this and I realized that I was there. I saw that. I was at the 2016. Yeah, wow. I was at the 2016 RNC, and I remember there were a lot of scuffles and stuff going around. And I remember this guy burned a flag, and I didn't realize it was the guy who had burned the flag way back when and caused this case to go to the Supreme Court and so forth. But there you go.
You inherit a bit of history.
Yeah.
I don't know that we should tell people you're going to get $225,000 if you try to pull a stunt like this. Heck of a payday.
Yeah. What's the ambulance chaser equivalent of First Amendments? So I don't know if we'll include this in the episode, but I'm just curious, Michael. So let me pull up this quote. In the minority, Rehnquist writes something that just sort of caught my eye. And so, arguing that it should be illegal to burn the flag. He says, surely one of the high purposes of a democratic society is to legislate against conduct that is regarded as evil and profoundly offensive to the majority of people. I think we all understand how fraught that phrasing is. But then he says, giving examples of things that are evil and profoundly offensive to the majority of people, he says, whether it be murder, embezzlement, pollution, or flag burning. And I was reading that and I was like, murder, embezzlement, and then pollution. And I'm like, can you put this in context for me? Why Rehnquist name-checking pollution as this like fundamental evil that the American public would be offended by?
Well, I think we tend to forget that because of the success of the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, that in the late 60s and 70s and early 80s, it was pretty disgusting. Most American waterways were just filthy with industrial waste. The air was bad. People ingested a lot of lead. If you fished, you couldn't eat the fish you caught. I think there are a lot of people who have forgotten. I was recently reminded of it just because we just recorded an episode where we talked about this. But yeah, Rehnquist lived through some seriously disgusting and national emergency level times with pollution. So I don't think that's that surprising. Actually.
Yeah.
I'm baffled because I'm like, murder, sure. Theft, okay. Pollution, I'm with you. Flag burning,
yeah.
I wouldn't put them all in the same.
No,
the
first three all have identifiable victims with real harms, right?
Yes.
Well, I think it was just boilerplate language, and then the fourth thing in the list was just insert case TK, and then whatever happened to be up that he was writing the opinion for, he just stuck it in there as the fourth example.
Got to do those pre-writes.
All right. All right. Well, this has been really fascinating, and we really appreciate you coming on. Michael, you want to tell people where they can find the show?
Yeah, you can find the show pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts. You can check out our website, 54pod.com, and that's spelled out, 54 spelled out. Find us on Twitter at 54pod.
Yeah. And you have a very thriving sort of community of listeners and Patreon and all that stuff, so I think people will find a whole world to dip into if they don't know it yet. But Michael Liroff, thank you so much for doing this. This has been really fun.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
And Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Our transcripts, which you can find on our website, are done by Kala Nakua. This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, creator-owned, listener-supported podcasts. Audrey Mardovich, executive producer. Yuri Lasordo, director of operations. Thanks to all of you who support this show by being members of Radiotopia. Find transcripts, sign up for our newsletter, find us on social, suggest topics, all that and more at our website, thisdaypod.com. See you soon.
Radiotopia.